It's interesting. I'd like to see some kind of scientific study that monitored the brainwave activity of people when they are driving vehicles. I have this suspicion that the brainwave activity would be similar to meditative states and the kind of activity that those states induce in the brain. For whatever reason, that's how I feel when I'm driving a car. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance here. It would depend on what you're doing. If you were driving for work, that might be a little different than if you were going on vacation, or little things like that would influence it in a bunch of different directions. But the overall point I'm getting at here is it's a kind of activity where your body is accessing stored memories to the point where your movements become kind of automatic and you don't have to think about what you're doing. And in that state where you don't have to think about your physical activity, your mind wanders as you're taking in the scenes all around you. And of course, always paying attention, but still your mind kind of detaches from what is going on immediately in your body. And I've found that this creates a great environment for thinking. I've had all kinds of interesting insights while I've been on drives, especially on longer drives where you're on a highway and there's not a lot of traffic around. I would imagine the brainwave activity of a taxi driver in New York City wouldn't quite be in a meditative state like I'm describing. So this is definitely a very specific thing I'm referring to that isn't taking place every time you get into a vehicle. Anyway, I bring that up because today I was driving and I was thinking about all of the stuff that I talked about in the last video, America, the Bill of Rights, that whole story, just the story of how civilization came into existence. Naturally, I'm biased towards how the United States of America came into existence because that's where I live and that's what I know. But I'm keeping the whole story in mind when I'm thinking about this. And I realized something as it related to the video that I did on that pastor who led the crypto scam, where I was talking about Christianity and the idea at the end there where a very obvious conclusion is reached, like, hey, they stole all of these teachings and created something else out of it. They created something that would pretend to be it, and then eventually they would expose themselves as a way to discredit the whole thing entirely and create the space for their brand new religion to come into existence in its place. When you think about it, the United States of America, the idea of it was the exact same thing as their fake version of religion. It's just this was their fake version of freedom. And the two are related, of course, because they have always called the U.S. a Christian nation, founded by Christians. And it's like, well, yes and no. There were fake Christians that created the Vatican in the first place who were involved in the creation of America, at the same time that there were actual real people who called themselves Christians at that time who believed in that so much that they came over here to escape the version of Christianity that was in Europe at the time, thinking they would get here and have the freedom to be a Christian in the way that they thought that term meant it. So the two ideas have always been related, but specifically, as a form of propaganda, they stole the idea of a free market, economically speaking. labeled the United States of America as that in the history books and everything along those lines, and then in reality didn't allow a true free market capitalist system in any way, shape, or form. And now, just like with Christianity, through the actions that they will attribute to the United States of America, to the rest of the world, they will point the finger at themselves and completely discredit the idea of free market capitalism for the rest of recorded history. They'll point at themselves and say, see, look what happened when we gave people freedom. Look what happened when we allowed the free market and capitalism. It ruined the world. Look at this. Look what America did. Look what its military did around the world when we allowed this to happen. Look at what it did to its own citizens. Look how the corporations poisoned them. And look at how they destroyed the environment, all in the name of making money. Look at how the shareholders are the only concern of the corporations when you have a quote-unquote free market. See, guys, we tried this and it just didn't work. No, we need something much different than this system. It's the exact same formula, viewing it as a long con. In terms of Christianity, it's, hey, a truth so pure and powerful came into this world that it changed it forever. It was infecting everyone that came into contact with it. The empire at the time didn't know what to do about it, and everyone in their panic just kind of looked around and said, well, the Pharisees told us to kill him, let's just kill him. And they killed the guy and then stole the teachings to create their own version of this thing that was so powerful in the hopes that they would be able to mislead people away from it in the long game. And as a part of that long game, they knew that they would eventually point the finger at themselves and all of their symbolism that went back to Babylon that they put into it from the beginning. But they put all of that in there knowing eventually they'll be able to point their finger at themselves and say, yeah, look, see, just get rid of all of that. None of that was true. According to the media, America equals freedom. And this is something that has been promoted all over the world. But now they can point their finger at themselves and say, look at what freedom got us here, guys. I mean, come on, we need something different. All of these American multinational corporations are destroying the planet. Look, they won't even respond to this crisis that is climate change because all they care about is money, because they're capitalists. On and on the talking points go, right? And if you talk to a younger person, they embody all of the anti-capitalistic rhetoric. They have a whole sheet of talking points along these lines. Because we're witnessing in real time a propaganda event on the level of the creation of fake Christianity. See the pattern here. We're watching the indoctrination of whole generations into this idea that capitalism is the worst thing that ever happened to planet Earth. But they never tell anyone, along with the propaganda, that, oh, that's not actually what we really have. This is just our version of it that we're now pointing our finger at as the reason for why everything exists the way that it does, because the system that we want to bring in for the entire world doesn't include any of the freedoms that we told you you had in the United States of America, as an example. Of course, they equate democracy with freedom all across the world. All of these countries that say they are democracies are likewise equated with freedom, and they are being blamed in the exact same way as the reason that we are in the situation that we are in. But really, they're just pointing their finger at themselves. Which is why it's so important to understand the history surrounding the creation of the United States of America and how it isn't what they told us it was. Because when you understand that, you can see how it was a plan many centuries in advance that was being implemented. They were always going to collapse America, just like they built those two towers in New York to collapse those eventually. Building them knowing it would be collapsed. It's all a part of the ritual. In other words, you're never going to be able to understand why things are happening in the world today if you don't understand that America was built to be destroyed. That all of this is taking place on purpose. When you have that context, everything starts to make sense. And when you really break it all down, this is nothing more than marketing. They are changing the way that they market government. It's always the same thing. They just put new messaging out about it. They give you a new commercial describing what it is that they repeat over and over and over again through the media until you believe it is what they say it is. In the same way that they originally convinced you that America equals freedom and the Pope equals Jesus. It's funny, I was watching a video about how years ago now, it wasn't the norm for people to eat something like bacon and eggs for breakfast until some Don Draper-esque character from Madison Avenue who was working with a pork company came up with a new campaign to promote this idea that bacon was a part of how you should start your day, and they went into all kinds of details about what they promoted along those lines, but the whole point was, after they spammed the newspapers with this idea for a long enough period in time, all of a sudden people started thinking that they should have bacon and eggs for breakfast. If you want to understand the world, understand marketing, because it's the same for everything, okay? They're just changing the messaging right now. We're in this big time shift where all the messaging is being changed. The messaging used to be that America was the most free country on earth. And now that messaging is shifting to actually America is the worst, most evil country on earth. From the perspective of the rest of the world, look at what it's doing. Look at what all these freedoms allowed to happen. We can't allow this ever again. This has to end. And that is where you get the narrative of the BRICS countries. And that's where all this disinformation, paid shillery, alternative media, and conspiracy theories on the internet is designed to do. It's a delicate propaganda strategy. As things continue to unfold in this way, as the messaging continues to drill the idea into the media that America is out of control, America is collapsing, America has destroyed this planet and the world by spreading its quote-unquote democracy everywhere it goes, spreading its quote-unquote freedom everywhere it goes, they will have the image to point at and say, look, see, that didn't work. This is why we need this international centralized regulation of all national activity. This is why every country needs to submit to these international guidelines and these international treaties that dictate what countries must do in these specific situations. This is why there must be this control, because look what the lack of control got us. We were on the brink of extinction. I mean, they're actually telling young college students that we are on the brink of an extinction level event because of what humans are doing to the planet. And remember, the plan has always involved some kind of fake peace being presented in the end, when it's all said and done, and as the decades progress, the idea of the nation state will become more and more of a relic. It will become more and more accepted that we don't need national sovereignty any longer because look at its track record. The United States of America is only one example. Look at all of the wars that are taking place all over the world. This is unacceptable. This model has to change. And the younger generations that have been bombarded with this propaganda will welcome the change that they will be told will result in peace, or think of anything along those lines, any kind of utopian ideas that they will sell. Again, going back to the marketing, it's always the worst type of dystopias that are marketed as utopias. That's why it's called a dystopia, because they get there through the marketing of utopia and then it turns into something else. But to these younger generations, it will become acceptable for this to be an individual problem that each of us needs to solve in our own way. And part of COVID was sort of getting people used to that idea. Hey, look, my neighbor over there, they won't take this thing that will solve this problem for everyone. They need to do their part. This is unacceptable. Let's boot them out of society because they won't do their part. That was getting that idea started in people's minds. It's been kind of bubbling under the surface in the environmental propaganda as well, where you have certain programs in California that limit water use, and they encourage you to rat on your neighbors if they're using too much water on their lawn. And stuff like that has been kind of in the works, but this is taking it to the next level where it will be openly welcomed to have every individual action tracked via technology so that we can make sure everyone is doing their part. Hey, look, we need to track everything that every person on the planet is doing so we can manage their carbon so we don't destroy the world. We need a detailed report of every single thing they do. And if they go over their limit, then they're out of society. And that naturally transitions into the social credit score, where this sentiment will openly embrace that type of thing because they're being told that the existence of these controls aren't controls at all. They're a way to save the earth and save humanity. The ends justify the means, or at least that's what they're told and that's what they think. Part of the utopian messaging that these kids are being given is the idea of being a world citizen as opposed to a national citizen. And they will naturally detach from what they have been told are these evil colonizing forces that took land that didn't belong to them in the first place. And accordingly, if this propaganda campaign succeeds, if this controlled demolition succeeds, they are going to have people doing the same thing that they have done with religion, where they look at what is promoted as Christianity or any of these other religions, and they say, oh, these people are insane. Look at what the religions have done on this planet. Look at what these religions are doing to children. Look at what people justify in the name of supporting this religion. They get rid of it all in the face of that obvious corruption. Well, I guess that whole thing was just completely fake and some kind of desperate human response to not knowing what's really going on. And we created these fairy tales, and the very arrogant among us refer to it as Sky Daddy or something along those lines, in a very patronizing way. Because that's how the propaganda has made them feel. Because those who repeat things like that have fallen for the scam. They fell for the long con, where all of the truth that was initially there is packaged into something else, and then they point their finger at that package and say, oh man, look at this. This is awful. And then people go, yeah, get that package out of here. And all the truth that was there is right along with it out the door. It's the same thing now with America and freedom. You're going to have a lot of young people who have been bombarded with this propaganda about how evil freedom is. And it's exactly what they said they were going to do. They will have people begging to be enslaved. Straight out of Brave New World, people will love their servitude because of this propaganda, because of this messaging, where they have equated their version of freedom as the thing that needs to be removed without people understanding that that's not really freedom. They took that concept and created something else out of it that they have labeled freedom, and now they're getting you to throw all the truth that came along with that away. To the point where people are going to be cheering for freedom to be destroyed. In the same way that they are cheering for God to be destroyed. Cheering for God to be thrown out of society. It's the same thing, right? Because of the fake versions of those things that they gave us and pretended like they embodied. So that was one thing that I was thinking about today when I was driving. And then I started to think about more important things. Because ultimately, all of this stuff that I'm talking about, countries, freedom, economies, all these propaganda campaigns are entirely meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Other than the fact that, yes, they do affect our daily existence and what we have to deal with. Which is to say, it's probably not entirely correct for me to state with such certainty that none of that matters in the grand scheme of things. Of course it matters, but just as it relates to your own expansion and your own understanding of life, it's really not all that relevant. And a lot of the times it can get in the way of that kind of self-awareness if you put too much focus onto what's going on in the world. But today in particular, I noticed a hole in my game, as it were. A lot of this has to do with just the way I was raised and the community that I was raised in and how I was taught to interact with people, where you extend a certain amount of courtesy to perfect strangers. That's just the way that it is. That's the way you behave. You have manners. Please, thank you, yes ma'am, no sir. Things like that. Innocent little pleasantries of society that just makes things a little more bearable on a day-to-day basis. And accordingly, this extends to when you're in a vehicle on the road. You expect other people to be similarly courteous in a way where you might open a door for somebody and say, yeah, I was here first, but here, let me get this door for you. Go ahead. I'll follow in after you. You expect the same kind of courtesy to be taking place on the road, and increasingly you find that this kind of courtesy is not reciprocated, and it can lead to road rage or just a negative experience. Or just pollute your stream of consciousness and get you agitated, and you all know what I'm talking about. Well, today I had this realization as I was driving because someone in another car did something extremely courteous to me. They went out of their way to avoid what would have been an inefficient situation. And they realized what they were doing and the problems that they were going to cause. And they very courteously got out of the way in spite of all of that. So everyone could get around them and there wouldn't be this gigantic traffic jam started. And as I was driving past them, I looked into their window and I just had the biggest smile on my face. And I waved at them and I just kind of gave them a thumbs up and said, thank you. I don't know if they could hear me, obviously, but I said it with my lips so they could make it out. And they smiled back, and I realized that my view of driving was very one-sided. Meaning when someone did something that wasn't courteous, that was very selfish and even dangerous, I would get very upset about it. Oh, what's wrong with these people? Like, hopefully you could feel that as I did it. And that came through, you know, that feeling, oh, what the heck? And you get that feeling that just sends you to that zone of agitation where someone could literally put $1 million in front of your face when it's going on, and you would look at them and say, get that money out of my face. The thing that's making me mad is happening and I'm mad. And you completely block out anything that would take you away from the fact that this is the thing that gets you mad. And it's very much that get off my lawn sentiment that people can have, where you just get to a certain point where you're old enough that there are certain things that solidify in your personality. And when one of them gets triggered, they're like little trip wires or landmines, and somebody steps on one of yours, and you're like, oh, I got you now. You're going to hear about this because you said the thing or you did the thing that I really get upset about, that really triggers me. And for whatever reason, we all give ourselves a pass to get mad about these things. Like it's okay because we think we're correct. Oh, I'm right about this and I'm going to set them straight. And I think a big part of becoming self-aware is realizing how silly all of that is. You're like a hate beacon, right? You've ever seen the beacons that come up on radar? They're like boop, boop, boop. But that's like a hate beacon where it's like coming out of your being with every breath and heartbeat. It's just these hate vibrations coming out of you. And it's the antithesis of, you know, smiling at somebody and giving them a thumbs up and waving at them or whatever, which would be like a love beacon, you know? And I realized that I wasn't positively reinforcing the situations that were very courteous. I was only reinforcing the situations that were very negative. Not realizing that the state those situations that were not courteous put me in was traveling with me after the incident. And it was probably rubbing off on my own conduct on the road and contributing to even more of the same situations happening again and again and again. On this particular drive, I had that realization, oh, I'm not reinforcing the positive behavior here. Part of the reason that I'm experiencing what I experience when I drive and I get in those frustrated states of mind, which a lot of the time is frustration that my meditative state is being broken. I'm in some kind of brainwave entrainment state when I'm driving, and then that kind of thing breaks it, then you get frustrated, and then you carry that frustration with you for the next few miles or whatever it is. And then maybe you carry that with you into your house or your apartment or the place you were going to or your work, whatever it is, you carry that with you. And then that rubs off on everyone you're interacting with. And maybe they do something they wouldn't ordinarily do to you because they just were feeling that from you in that moment. And they give you a look or do something similarly that's just kind of off-putting in the moment, and you don't realize how you're contributing to the way that everyone is acting around you. So I made it a point on this particular drive to really reinforce that positivity to everyone who exhibited something that deserved that kind of interaction. And it was one of the best drives that I've had in a long time, right? How simple. And of course, this is a metaphor for how we engage with life in general. Meaning, if you take this approach with everything that you do and everyone that you interact with, I think you'll find that your life significantly improves no matter what else is going on around you and no matter what they're telling you is going on via the media. In other words, whereas before I would have let something that happened on the road impact my whole rest of the drive, this time, when one thing like that happened, I didn't give it positive reinforcement, but I looked at it and I said, you know what? I'm not going to let this ruin this state that I'm in right now. And I'm just going to look forward to the next opportunity to pass on some positive reinforcement to somebody who does the right thing. And in this way, those who would bring you down lose a lot of their power. As I said before, this is the Palpatine exercise, where something happens in your life and you sit there and you get so mad and, ooh, you hate them and what they did. Ooh, I hate you. And you sit there and you think, yes, let the hate flow through you, in that scene where he does that to Luke. And then you have that realization, oh man, this is ridiculous. What was I even getting mad about? This is absurd. Because yes, it feels good to hate sometimes. There is no denying that. It can overtake you. So as I was driving today, I kind of had a further insight into that Palpatine exercise that I like to use in my own life, where it was kind of like, okay, I don't need to feel some type of way about these people who do certain things that I would look at as bad or negative or somehow against me. First of all, because I realized as I was driving that I was the cause of a lot of this based on how I was projecting my energy and how I was interacting with people after these things happened, which only escalates situations and makes them worse. And then, as I said, contributes to them happening more and more and more. You catch yourself in some kind of self-sabotage loop where you're just continually exacerbating your own problems. So when I recognize, first of all, that I was a big part of the problem, and then I adjust my behavior secondarily to not let someone else influence my state of being when they do something outrageous, and I focus instead on maintaining where I am, that state my stream of consciousness is in, and looking forward to the next chance to reward someone with positive energy who does something that's the opposite of outrageous, does something that's incredibly kind and considerate, you put yourself in a different loop. That's the antithesis of self-sabotage. Obviously, this is something that you have to learn to do over time. It's not something that will just immediately happen, because even I, saying this, the next time I go somewhere, reality will try to prove to me that I'm completely full of it and have something outrageous transpire just to see if I'll lose my mind and go against everything that I'm saying here. But that's all part of the challenge and chasing the goal of being an honorable person that means what they say and stays true to their word. Because it's funny how our own personal lives, our personalities, are kind of like those fake creations that the powers that be crafted, that I was getting into earlier about religion and America being free. Those propaganda campaigns that they put out there to tell you it's something that it really isn't, and to take the truth and twist it into something that it isn't, so that when they eventually expose themselves, you dismiss the truth entirely as something that must not have been the truth because it didn't work. That's the goal of those psyops, but I hope you can see how our lives are very similar. Maybe because we live in a world where that kind of stuff is constantly done to us, that we kind of adopt the strategy for our own lives, and we create these versions of ourselves that aren't really the truth. It's propaganda that we create about ourselves. And we stick to that propaganda in the face of adversity. That's how we're trained to be. We don't want to look deeper than the propaganda and ask the question, hey, is this my fault? Hey, am I doing something here that's contributing to what I'm experiencing? No, we want to point our finger at the propaganda and say, yes, that is the problem, the other person. They are this thing. They're the reason. And similarly, you want to just get rid of it all in those moments that are really challenging. I'm done with human beings in this world. I can't take it anymore. You have those kinds of reactions where it's kind of like throwing away religion, throwing away the idea of freedom in the way that it's presented to you. Well, we do that on our own, in our personalities, where we protect ourselves and we protect this image that we've created of ourselves to where we flip everything on someone else and only pay attention to what they are presenting and what they have done and why it's all their fault. I see that a lot with people all around me who have problems with their relationships. They have a great difficulty going into their own behavior and seeing it as it really is. I'm sure you guys all know people like this who just, no matter what they do, they're always in a place where something has gone wrong. And at a certain point, you got to look at someone like that and be honest with them and say, hey, I really think you need to take a look at how you might be contributing to all of these things. And so a part of that as it relates to the world and what they are giving us as propaganda, we have to look at ourselves in the mirror in that context too and say, well, how am I contributing to allowing them to get away with this kind of stuff? What am I doing in my own life that is allowing this kind of thing to take place? Am I as good as I think I am? That's what they tell me on the internet, that I'm this special person that woke up, but did I really? All right, I won't go on anymore on this one. I'll leave this open-ended with that question that I would suggest you ask yourself, because some very useful things can come out of that type of introspection.